Chapter 11, King Barf, read by Miss Midden. As winter melted away, the creatures of the mountain began to emerge from their long slumber. I woke one morning to a pixie on my nose. It seemed the pixies had nested in my chimney, and now that they were waking, the whole cottage had become one big, swarming pixie nest. I tried to swat them away from the tangles of gold all over the floor, but they shrieked and bit me. I ran outside. The air was still chilly, but at least I could breathe without my tongue freezing. Then I noticed something strange. The villagers should have all been at work in the mines by now, but instead, everyone was gathering in the village square. The crowds were just visible from my cottage down the street and in front of the mill. It seemed the whole village was in there, chattering and buzzing, and as excited as the pixies inside. I found Red walking with her mother toward the square. "What's going on?" I asked. "Mountain Pass is open," she said. "So?" She pointed down the mountain. "Someone's coming up." A big open sound rang through the air like the village bell, but deeper and longer. It sounded again and again with a regular rhythm. "It's a royal procession," said a woman. "A what? What for?" The most royal visitor we had ever received was the tax collector, and he never brought a procession. I looked down the road winding up the mountain and saw the most amazing sight. 12 horses, 24, and not little horses from the mountain, but big war horses from the kingdom. And on those horses were soldiers dressed in red and gold tunics with spears and swords and bows and arrows. We waited. Everyone was whispering excitedly, guessing at who it could be and why they were coming. "Maybe there's a war," said Frederick, "and they need soldiers." "Maybe we haven't been sending enough gold for the king's liking," said a woman, which I thought was probably closer to the truth. The procession finally reached the village. A soldier lifted a golden horn to his mouth and blew 3 high notes. Pixies fluttered all around the horn. "Announcing His Royal Majesty, King Bartholomew Archibald Reginald Fife." The villagers all gasped in unison. Everyone whispered to each other. Never before had the king come to visit the mountain. Everyone hushed as the soldiers parted and the king came forward. My entire life, whenever I heard mention of his name, King Bartholomew Archibald Reginald Fife, I imagined someone very big and very handsome and very brainy. I think everyone did. But now that I saw him, King Barf almost seemed more fitting. If I had just looked at his royal costume, I suppose I could have been impressed, though gold wasn't so impressive to me anymore. King Barf wore a gold crown on his head, gold chains around his neck, gold armor on his chest, gold rings on all his fingers. His saddle was gilded gold. His boots had gold buckles. I imagine if I could see beneath his horse's hooves, the horseshoes would have been gold, 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 gleaming gold. There were servants on all sides of the king with giant paddles, and they swatted at the pixies trying to converge on the king and all his glorious gold. But King Bartholomew Archibald Reginald Fife, King Barf, was chubby. He had a turned-up nose and floppy ears. He looked like a pink pig with a crown on his head. "My people of the mountain," he said, double chins wobbling. He sounded like a pig with a stuffy nose. "Your work is so valuable to the kingdom. I have traveled here personally to your village because a curiosity has come to my attention." King Barf pulled something from his saddlebag, and the blood drained from my face. He held up a single spool of thread. "Gold threads perfectly coiled. My gold! For several years now, I have received little gold for your tax. I am a generous king. I have sustained you. Yet lo and behold, I find this gold brought to me by one of my own advisors. Fine gold. Fine workmanship, and yet no one in the kingdom seems to know where it came from. My gold, the miller, when I traded it, I didn't think about what he would do with it or where it would end up. How could I not have seen this? Of course, he would trade the gold in the kingdom, and the king, loving gold as he did, would get his hands on it eventually, and then, of course, he would wonder. It wasn't normal gold dug out of the mountain in clumps and pebbles mixed with dirt. No craftsman could have molded the gold into such fine threads. This gold was only I could spend. King Barf's piggy eyes turned cold and suspicious. My soldiers will search through your homes and your mines to be sure that you are not robbing me of one of my rights to the gold in the kingdom. If I find you are deceiving me, stealing from me—" He squeezed the gold tight in his hand. He didn't crush it or make it disappear, but we understood. A murmur went through the crowd until the soldier blew his horn again. "All citizens of the mountain will go to their homes and await inspection." Everyone hustled and bustled against one another, all moving in different directions. I stood still. I could feel Red staring at me. Finally, I looked at her, and for the first time, we had worked side by side in the sluices. Red hit me. She slapped me right over the head and said, "You really are a numbskull," and she trudged off. Was there any point in arguing? I was doomed. There was gold lying in tangles on my floor as if it were nothing but straw. I hadn't even bothered to hide it. And what about the miller? Did he still have gold sitting in his house? Surely he had hidden it well, or he was making some kind of plan. I could hide mine too in the woods, maybe near Red's hollow beehive log. I didn't care about the gold, but I didn't want to go to the dungeons for the rest of my life or sit in the stocks so people could throw mud and rotten food at me. I raced home. I gathered all the skeins and tangles and bits of gold that I could find, wrapped them in a rag, and ran out the back door. A few pixies that were outside flittered out over and started sniffing and chattering around the bundle. "Don't swat them. Don't cause commotion. If I let them be, no one will notice." I crept through the trees and huddled behind rocks, away from roads and paths where soldiers were going in and out of houses. The gnomes were running around madly with messages from soldiers to the king. Only gnomes have a hard time with longer names and messages, so King Barf's names always came out a little garbled. "Message for King Bartholomew Archibaldi Reginaldi Fife. No gold here, no gold here, no gold, no gold, no gold." I walked slowly. I was so small, no one would notice me, as long as I didn't panic. I passed the village square and approached the mill, where the miller stood outside with his 9 sons and Opal. 3 soldiers were about to go inside, but the miller didn't look nervous. Maybe he'd already traded all the gold. But when he caught sight of me creeping towards the trees with my suspicious little bundle, his eyes went wide with horror. I shook my head and tried to point in the direction of the woods. I could slip by. If he kept the soldiers' attention, they wouldn't notice me. But the pixies noticed me. All the gold in my bundle was just too much to hide from them. They flew to me one by one, and the sound grew. It started as a soft twitter, like the distant chirping of birds, and then built to a high, steady hum. And then there was silence. It was the kind of silence that lasts only a moment or two, but feels like 100 hours because you're waiting for something awful to happen. I remember when I had this idea I could fly. I built myself wings out of sticks and chicken feathers, and I climbed a high rock and jumped. I didn't fly. I broke my arm, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was just the moment before, when I went from the exhilaration of soaring through the air to the horror of plummeting toward the hard earth. I knew I was going to hit the ground and feel pain. This was like that moment, the moment before everything went bad. When the pixies attacked, I flung my arms up and swatted at them. I swung my bundle of gold. I clawed at the ground, flinging mud and dirt and snow in all directions. Finally, the pixies were gone and everything was quiet again, even quieter than before. I took stock of myself. I still had my bundle of gold tight in my hand. I turned around. The miller and his 9 ugly sons and his 1 pretty daughter and the 3 soldiers all stared at me, and then something on the ground. I followed their eyes and my stomach twisted. There on the ground was a spool of gold, unraveling toward the soldiers. The spool rolled again, and my life unraveled before my eyes, 1 roll for every year. I snatched up the gold, clutching it to my chest. Then I turned and ran for the woods. I don't know why I thought I could run, but I was going to until a giant horse blocked my path, and there were shiny black boots right in my face. Boots with giant gold buckles. King Barf looked down at me, and his piggy eyes narrowed on the gold I still clutched in my hands. He sniffed as if he could smell the rest of the gold in my bundle. Well, well, he said. The pixies seem to find you even more enchanting than they do me. How fascinating.